Hey, what's up guys? I have a very special video for you today. Ivan Beram was a designer on Micro Forte's cult classic, Fallout Tactics. Now, nearly 20 years after its release, I had the opportunity to interview him about the game's development, design, and legacy. To begin, I asked Ivan when he joined Micro Forte and about his responsibilities on the project. I wasn't there from the beginning. I was on the project until its end for I think a bit over a year. It was probably in development for around 3 to 4 months when I arrived in early 2000. The project was still in early development, with the design doc still being written, and mostly a tech demo for the game showing off the tile-based 2D engine. I was hired as a level designer for the project, along with one other, Damian Meyer. Actually, I had moved down to Canberra from Sydney to enroll in the AIE, 3D Animation College, so as to become a 3D artist. Though enrolled, I was also encouraged by John D. Margaretti to also apply with Micro Forte as they were looking for level designers. I applied and got the job, and did that instead of studying. Getting back on track, I was primarily a level designer on the project. However, I also contributed to game design and am listed as a game designer in the credits. Fallout Tactics was planned to be developed in a short 12 months. However, the inexperienced dev team needed to create both a vast single-player campaign and various multiplayer modes while working with a new engine. On top of this, they had to appease the existing Fallout fanbase and an external publisher in Interplay. As a result, it would take 15 months before its release in March of 2001. So I asked Ivan about his experience during development. For a long time on the project, there was a misconception of what the game actually was. Many on the team thought they were in effect making Fallout 3, not understanding that we were creating a squad-based tactical game with RPG elements set in the Fallout universe. This caused a number of issues during the game's production, and were not always stemming from the developer side of the development table. There were features that may have worked well in Fallout, the turn-based RPG, that did not work in Fallout Tactics, the real-time/turn-based tactics game. For example, Fallout had random encounter maps that more or less worked for Fallout the RPG. However, they did not work at all in Fallout Tactics due to the inherent difference in gameplay that required more maps to facilitate tactical play. We were contractually obligated to create and include them in the game. I was unaware of their inclusion until we were asked to create them near the end of the project. To be frank, I was somewhat difficult about them and basically refused to work on them. I tried to make the point, likely poorly, to the team that these would actually add nothing to the overall quality of the gaming experience, but would actually detract from it. And our limited development time and resources would have been better spent elsewhere. To put it simply, I was unsuccessful regarding this, and to be honest, maybe fans of the game really liked the random encounter maps and I was wrong. But in my opinion, we were better off cutting these from the game. And to be fair to the team, I believe it was 14 Degrees East plus Interplay that still wanted these in the game and didn't want to budge on this, even though we had gone past our 12-month deadline. Regardless, things clarified for the team regarding what kind of project we were creating when we were in essence given a deadline to clarify to the publisher that we could deliver the game we were contracted to deliver. This culminated in a playable, vertical slice demo of the game. In a way, it forced certain team members to drop preconceived notions of what the game was supposed to be when they had a snapshot of the game they could actually play. Realistically, 12 months for a game as complex as Fallout Tactics, for a team that was largely inexperienced, using new tech, and implementing multiplayer along with a single-player campaign, not to mention both turn-based and real-time options for play, well, that was just unrealistic, and I think it is a testament to the team that it was completed in 15 months. The single-player missions were numbered internally 1 through 26. However, the 13th, 14th, 18th, and 20th missions are missing. Along with this, there are unused NPCs, notes, quests, items, a speech skill, etc. So I asked Ivan if he remembered any notable cuts from Tactics. All games have cut content to some extent. For example, there were more missions planned and even developed that were not in the final game. Many of these were cut due to levels being made to fit an early guess as to what gameplay would be like, which didn't align to the gameplay required from levels and ended up being. If I recall correctly, initially we had to deliver a lot of missions for the single-player campaign. This was reduced when it was apparent that even with fewer levels, we would still meet the minimum hours of play required for the title. To be frank, I don't recall any notable content that was cut. There may have been a few interesting missions, or at least concepts for them, but it was so long ago that it's hard to remember. The main thing I remember that had a big impact on what levels got kept and cut was the early AI. It just wasn't appropriate for the style of game we were trying to create, and to a degree, stems back to the issues with members of the team thinking we were creating Fallout 3. Essentially, the AI would calculate the best combat option available to it, the most effective, which would result in the player being swarmed by NPCs that would then proceed to punch and kick the snot out of you. If you were playing real time, you were powerless to stop them as you could never get a hit in. If playing turn-based, you had to fight hand-to-hand regardless if you wanted to play a different way. There was an edict that solved this problem. We were to expand all the levels so that there was room to maneuver, so the player could play in a manner to accommodate the AI. So many levels were made to accommodate AI that just wasn't appropriate for the game, due to lack of clarity in the game we were developing. Again, citing my own stubbornness, when asked to make the necessary changes to accommodate the AI at the time, I basically ignored the request, whereas others did not. When things came to their logical conclusion, fix the gameplay AI or risk the project being canned, well, many of the modified maps were just cut rather than fixed, / rolled back to an earlier state where they were better suited for tactical combat. And once gameplay had been achieved, it became apparent that missions would play for longer than first imagined, and we had too many maps anyway. All of the levels I worked on ended up in the game. Something else that comes to mind that really isn't cut content is the E3 map. It was the first multiplayer map for the game. Actually, the first completed map for the game that was shown at E3 2000, I think. I, the other level designer Damian Meyer, and the lead designer Ed Orman worked on parts of the map. I then did an all-nighter to work on it more and polish it for the event. It was an important milestone for the game as it was the first time you could play the game, albeit via local multiplayer. Unfortunately, there were changes made to the engine, which meant that the completed map could no longer be opened in the final version of the game. So not really cut, just lost via the course of development. I know this is not what you're asking about, but trying to remember everything that was cut is difficult. For me, it is remembering the content that I think would have been really cool, but due to budget limitations, was quickly dropped. For example, I wanted the rad roaches to be able to go up walls. I think it would have been really cool for the player to be exploring a town, see a rad roach appear from behind it, scurry along up the wall and onto the top of a building and out of sight. However, this required more by way of art and code to achieve and was quickly determined to be unfeasible. Next, I ask if working on tactics changed his approach to game design. I'm not sure it changed my approach to game design, as I had no professional experience as a game designer prior to this, just hobby. I think it made me realize certain things, like how games are made up of finite objects, and if you want to get a game created that has a lot of content, you need to take a modular approach, along with making sure that your development team has the tools they need to get the job done. The level editor was a great tool to have and work with on the project. It also made me realize that game design as a profession, at least not at the time, was not as highly valued as others. Even something more practical and technically oriented as level design was an afterthought and usually given to existing members of the art and QA teams instead of actual designers hired for the role. Overall, working on the project was a great first project to have under your belt. There were very few such titles like this being worked on in Australia at the time. Fault Tactics was a very complex game with a lot of areas of game design that you wouldn't have been exposed to if you had worked on another title being developed in Australia at the time. Single and multiplayer gameplay, complex levels that had to facilitate tactical gameplay, along with mission story requirements, including dialogue. The project gave me the opportunity to try my hand at a bit of everything when it came to game design. After Tactics went gold, much of the dev team was laid off. While this is an unfortunately common practice in the video game industry, it was handled very poorly from what I understand. So I inquired with Ivan about it. Well, I don't think these things are ever well handled, and I think many on the team were inexperienced and naive, without trying to make them out as being wrong here. But we had worked on a high-profile title of a complexity that not many had worked on in Australia. It was also fairly well received / rated. I think they just thought that their jobs were secure and that there was no way that the publisher was not going to do Fault Tactics 2. And even if they don't, why would Micro Forte lay them off? However, Micro Forte was actually two studios, one in Canberra having just completed a game for an established license, and another in Sydney, working on an original IP MMO with innovative server technology called Big World that the company was betting on being their future. There were layoffs at both studios, however, the vast majority were at Canberra. Personally, it came as little surprise to me. Not saying it was not a difficult time for me, but I realized that Fault Tactics 2 was not going forward months prior when I heard the direction for the game. There were a lot of other factors relating to things I had heard regarding our relationship with the publisher, but the planned direction and pitch for the sequel to me was kind of the nail in the coffin. I actually posted a message to the entire team informing them that once the project was over with, that they would be out of a job and should start looking for one now, which basically made me very unpopular with the entire team, not just my bosses. I guess if anything, I think things could have been handled with a bit more honesty, as many on the team were not expecting to be out of a job after having successfully shipped a high-profile title. Again, there was a degree of naivety of what to expect, as for many this was their first job in the industry. It may not have changed their situation at all in the end, but at least it would have been less of a shock to them, as many felt betrayed. Nearing the end of our interview, I asked Ivan if he had any standout memories from the game's development. It's more of a hindsight thing for me, considering how long it's been, 19 years. I really didn't realize the opportunity Fault Tactics was at the time, and why I was lucky to work on it as my first project. I guess the real standout for me occurred when I revisited the project many years later, and actually looked at all the levels for the game. It then dawned on me just how much of my work is in Fault Tactics. There aren't many single-player levels in the game that I didn't end up working on at some stage. However, there are several that were completely mine, or for the most part, such as Newton, where I got to use the shipping container tiles to actually make shipping containers for the Reaver camp. St. Louis, where I put a lot of effort creating the sand dunes and bunkers from scratch using smaller tiles. Buena Vista, which I did at the later stages of the project in a week. I was very happy to be using another color other than brown for the ground, as it was a snow map. Then there is the Junkyard multiplayer map. Though I created others, this was my first after a long time jumping around working on various single player levels, where I just got to work on a map all to myself. from concept through to final gameplay tweaks. These were coming in at the end of the project, and the focus of the game was single player, not multiplayer, so these maps were very much our own. Finally, I asked Ivan what it was like to work on Fallout Tactics and the Fallout series. It's a pity that it isn't really seen as a Fallout game like Fallout 1 and 2 are, that it's not really canon. Fallout was not a game I played, and Fallout 2 I played briefly as research for Fallout Tactics. But since then, 3 and 4 have come out along with New Vegas and all the DLCs. I wasn't a Fallout fan going into the development of Fallout Tactics, actually quite ignorant of Fallout and its fandom, but I'd have to say that I am one now. It is a shame that Tactics isn't considered canon or typically mentioned alongside the other titles. Despite that, its unique blend of Fallout's post-apocalyptic world and turn-based / real-time tactical combat will always remain a highlight in the series to me. I have to give a huge thanks to Ivan Beram for making this episode possible.